Greetings from the Witch House. I am your host, Doctor Gallow, and tonight I present to you another self-penned tale of suburban terror. I am joined by my very talented friend and collaborator, Dodge the Grave, who plays the part of Cass. Enjoy the story, and mind where you poke your nose. This is called Down the Witch Hole. They left the pub, one neither of them had been to before and was certain nobody would remember them being at, and put their hoods up to walk back to David's house. Normally, on arriving, they would drink a bit more, end up in bed together, and she would go home, her husband blissfully unaware of what she'd been up to. David hadn't met him, and had no desire to. Now that he thought about it, he couldn't even remember his name after 6 months of these clandestine meetups. "Can I tell you a story?" he asked her, as they walked along in the dark. "It's worth hearing."
"I'm all ears,"
said Cass. He couldn't see her eyes under the hood, but he knew they'd have a little twinkle to them, like they always did when he told her one of his many tales. It was a part of their time together he enjoyed a lot. He was good at it too. "When I was a kid, there was this old house on our street, derelict. It's actually my house now. I ended up buying it and renovating it when I moved out."
"Who owned it?"
"Some old guy who lived down south. His mum had left it to him when she died, but he didn't want it. Just left it there to rot. Anyway, it was abandoned long before I bought it, so my mate and me, we went exploring. We got in through a side window."
"Did it not have an alarm?"
she asked, lighting up a cigarette as they walked. She did that, tried to poke holes in his tails to see if he could think on his feet. He didn't mind though. It made him better at it. Nah, I guess her son didn't even see enough worth in the place to get one. "Can I carry on now, or do you have any other questions?" She laughed and shook her head, so he continued. "So Pete and me, we made our way through the house. There was nothing much in it. The wallpaper was all peeling off, smelled damp. The curtains were mouldy as well. They were shut, but the sun was still coming through them, so we could see well enough where we were going. We didn't dare to go upstairs. We came through into the kitchen and the keys were still in the lock, so I opened it and we looked out into the back garden. It was just grass out there, long as you'd expect, and at the bottom of it was all overgrown with bushes. There were a couple of trees on either side of the bushes that needed a good pruning. It was dark down that end of the garden because of the trees, but the fences on either side of the garden were really tall too. So we went down to have a look, like you do." They had reached David's house now, and he opened the door for them, letting Cass walk in first. She went to take off her shoes, but he stopped her. "Leave them on, I need to show you something."
"This is a good one, David,"
she told him.
"I feel like I'm right in the middle of it."
He walked through to the kitchen and pulled the stopper from a bottle of wine and poured them both a glass. "So it's cold down there at the bottom of the garden. The sunshine hasn't seen it in years, and there's kind of a hole in this bush, right? Big enough to get through, but we can't really see inside because it's even darker in there. It looks like someone's used sticks to build like a tunnel into the bush, like kids making, a den or like a wigwam."
"Was there a monster in it?"
He smiled. "So after the garden ends, it's just wasteland. Thorn bushes and stuff. Nobody can really get in there without serious effort, and nobody cares enough to try, so this tunnel thing, we don't know how long it's going to go on for. We're daring each other to poke our heads in, but we're too scared. And then," he paused for dramatic effect, "and then I look at the hole, and there's already a head in it. There's this big white face in there, looking out at us."
"Oh, fuck, that made the hairs on my neck stand up."
"It's completely true. Anyway, we're frozen to the spot and she kind of slithers out of the hole into the garden. She's stark naked. Her skin is completely white and so are her eyes. I remember thinking she had no pupils then. I noticed she had, but they were like thin lines going from top to bottom, like a snake's eyes, She looks wet, like she's covered in grease or oil or something, and there's mud and twigs and stuff sticking to her. Her hair's black and matted and all stuck to her face, and shoulders, all the way down her front. It's so long, like she's never cut it in her life. Her hands and feet are filthy, and the nails go on for inches, curling back on themselves, and they were thick with black dirt and soil. And she's just standing there. And so are we, 'cause we can't move, we're too scared. Do you want to see it?
See what?
The hole. It's still there.
Fuck off, David.
It is. I can show you right now. I've got a torch.
I don't know. Am I safe?
Nope. She chuckled.
Alright, fuck it. Can I take this wine?
Absolutely. The two of them went out of the back door, following David's torchlight down the grass.
It looks a lot better than how you described it.
Cass said as she negotiated her way along.
At least you've cut the lawn.
She noted the fences on either side were rather tall. He'd really done his best to set the scene for this one. She did love his spooky little stories. And there it is, he said when they reached the end and pointed his torch at the hole. And it was a hole, just like he described. She could make out the trees at either side and saw the sticks that had been left inside to prop the tunnel open like a weird little mine shaft.
Whoa. Did you make this for me just for the story? You're amazing.
I didn't. It's always been there.
Yeah. Well, are you going to tell me the ending then? It's fucking cold out here.
It never really ends, he said, still pointing the torch at the hole. The witch that came out of the hole, well, she took Pete back in with her, and I never saw him again. She took him instead of me because she chose me to keep her. To feed her.
I want to go back inside now,
she said. The chill of the night air and the way the story was going was starting to get to her. Suddenly, she wasn't enjoying herself anymore. We're not going back in. Everything I've told you is true. I have to tell you the truth, and you have to come willingly. It's like a caveat.
David,
she started, but there was a movement and she glanced back to the hole to see a white face, angled so that only one of its eyes, slitted and reptilian, looked back at her. She froze, entranced. A tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cheek, but she began to walk toward the thing in the hole, powerless to do anything else. I made a promise to take the house. The old fella, he must have known what his mum had been looking after here. He practically gave it to me. He watched as Cass lowered herself onto all fours and crawled over to the hole. Her head went inside first, then her arms, and the arms of the witch, muddy, greased, and ending with those hideous, curled-up claws, embraced her back gently, then pulled her inside. One of her high heels fell off as it got caught on the edge of the bush, as her feet disappeared. There was a wet, rustling noise, and it was over. The culmination of 6 months of planning, and in another decade, he'd have to figure out how to lure another one in without lying to them. It was part of the promise he'd made when he'd watched Pete disappear into the black hole all those years ago. He picked up Cass's errant shoe and threw it in. Nothing ever came back out of the hole.